Well, I don't have much money, and I don't have much time, and I don't have many friends I could call mine. And I've been deceived, yeah, but haven't we all? I've seen the sun rise, and I've seen the sun fall. Well, I don't know why, and I don't know where, and I don't even know how, and I no longer care. But I've seen your face, and I've heard your call. Yes, I've seen the sun rise, and I've seen the sun fall.
Hello and welcome to another SDA Q&A. I'm your host for today, Peter Dixon, here with Kenton Johansen and Bruce Johansen. Great to have you guys here with us today. Welcome.
Today.
And good to have you back again. This is our mini series within this season 5 we've got here of SDA Q&A, where we're up to number 5, I think it is. Where we're looking at that 70's SDA Jesus Revolution, for want of a better term. There was a huge revival in the gospel in the 70's all around the world. Probably began in the late 60s, and the wave of this revival reached Adventism in the early 70's, late 60s as well, according to some of the people I've spoken to. And Kenton, tell us a little bit about how your father was involved and how he's connected to Bruce. And Bruce.
Yeah, so Dad was preaching at East Paran, in the burbs of Melbourne, and Dad's a cousin of Bruce. So Bruce has a few things he wanted to share about the freedom of the gospel and what that meant to him.
Right. Well, we'll come to that. I'm looking forward to today's chat. This we chatted to both you and Bruce already. I think, I'm not sure which of these mini series it was, number 4 or 3 or something like that. And it was fascinating. And we just didn't cover everything I wanted to cover. So I said, Bruce, can we get you back? And you've graciously accepted. So thank you very much. Before we start today, everyone, I just want to give a quick plug to Gil Valentine for this book. This is Gilbert M. Valentine, Ostriches and Canaries, Coping with Change in Adventism, 1966 to 1979. If you're watching now, go to Amazon and buy this book. This is one of the best books on this topic that I've ever read. And it covers this incredible era that we're talking about today, but it talks about the politics going on behind the scenes and perhaps explains why this incredible Jesus movement was stifled by the leadership at the time. So even though we're talking about not a book that either of you have written, this book is in a must-have if you want to truly understand, in many ways, the squashing of the incredible gospel movement that was rising in the 70s. But not only that, this book gives an incredible view of the entire landscape of Adventism, the politics from way back, pre-1919 even. And I just honestly get your pen out or get your devices, go to Amazon now and buy it. I'm halfway through, cannot put it down.
Oh, good.
And we're hoping to have Gil on the show to talk a bit about it.
Awesome.
But it is a brilliant book.
Sounds really interesting.
Yeah, ostriches and canaries. Everyone watching?
Yeah.
I'm buy it. I bought it on Amazon and it came in the mail only 2 or 3 days later. I think there's an Australian branch here as well.
Cool.
Gilbert M. Valentine. Have you guys met Gil at all? Have you crossed paths with him over the years?
Yeah, he was at college when I was there.
He'd be a bit older than kind of your generation.
No, I mean, he was in admin.
Yes, sorry, you're right. Yes.
Yeah.
And when I was a student at Longburn, he was there. He's popped up in several parts of my life.
I knew him by reputation. I don't know that I can remember meeting him.
Well, he's an incredible scholar, but he writes in a way that you just can't put down. Like there's several books I've read in the last few years that have really inspired me. And this is in the top 3. It's just incredible.
Okay.
Yeah. And you'd both enjoy it because it creates this setting. It creates the almost like a revelation of just why, like Kenton, your dad, Bruce, your cousin, why there just seem to be invisible walls that were trying to stop things all the time. This book just explains why. Stuff that you guys knew already, but it just puts it into a really concise picture.
Yeah.
So look, what so we dive straight in, and we've got comments open, by the way. So people, one of the great things about this platform is people can comment and write as we're going. If you're writing from YouTube, you don't need to put your name on because it comes up on the screen. If you're writing from within Facebook, please put your name just before your comment. Literally write your name in the comment and then what you're going to say, and that way we know who's saying it. Now, Ray, just we'll bring it up before it gets lost in the thread. He's a former Adventist. He's written, "There's no such thing as a Jesus movement in Adventism. Investigative judgment. Jesus saves no one. I won't say that word. 3 angels message saves no one. Stop the lies." Thanks for that, Ray. But regardless of whether one thinks there was a Jesus movement in Adventism, I think it's more of how successful it was. And certainly a lot of people were turned on to the gospel and to Jesus via this revival within Adventism. So Ray, it was a movement within Adventism, in my humble opinion. And it actually had some incredible outcomes that inspired people to really follow the gospel. Many people left the church, followed the gospel. Ray, I'm not sure how old you are, but it may have even been a movement that helped people to talk to you, to learn about the gospel. And so, the gospel does reside at times within Adventism.
Can I just add something?
Yes, please.
Anybody that was listening last time we spoke, I talked about the revival in Warburton, and that was in June 1940. But right at the beginning of the war.
Yes.
And that wasn't a gospel revival. It was a revival of spirituality.
Right.
And
that's interesting. And you felt that within Adventism.
Well, that was a tremendous revival.
Yeah.
I talked about that last time.
Yes. Yeah.
How that prayer meetings went on sometimes all night. Incredible. And people were making rights wrong with each other. and there was people weeping, and it was, you could feel the Spirit there. So that was long before the gospel was ever talked about.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting? Because that kind of spiritual revival is as important as this one we're talking about in the 70s,
Yeah.
because essentially it's from the same source.
Yes. Yeah.
And you can probably find pockets of these revivals throughout history.
Well,
Tell us more about this one, or whatever you wanted to talk about. Let's get into the interview. Over to you, Bruce.
well, last time when we finished, you said that you would like me to talk about the freedom of the gospel.
Yes.
And I just need to give you a bit of history. When I was a boy, I mentioned before, I lost my dad when I was 7, and my mum was left with 5 kids from 19 down to 7, and the 7-year-old was me. And I was brought up at my mother's knee, virtually on the Bible, but mostly Mrs. White. And she used to read to me stuff from Mrs. White as a kid, and I just, didn't know any better. And Mum used to, and Mum was a saint, don't get me wrong. She was a saint, and I believe she'll be in the kingdom in spite of her strict beliefs. But she used to read to me about the second coming of Christ. And from Mrs. White, she would talk about, as we saw the little cloud coming in the sky, we would look up and we were fearful because nobody knew whether they would be saved. They had no certainty of salvation. And so in those days too, you would have a prayer meeting or a camp meeting or a week of prayer, and it would always finish up by saying, who knows, this could well be the last camp meeting we will ever have, or this could be the last week of prayer and all this. And so it coloured my life because I thought, what's the use of going to college and taking 3 years to study? The Lord will be here long before that. And so my life would have taken totally different direction had I realised that the fact that nobody knows when the Lord is coming. And anyhow, so that when I would, the coming of the Lord was fearful because Mum used to talk, she talked to the church. She would say, we've got to just have every sin confessed because one sin can keep you out of the kingdom. Mrs. White says so. If there is one unconfessed sin, and so she would say, plead with the Lord to reveal every sin in your life so that you can confess it, or else you can miss out on eternity. And I was fearful of that. And so I would dream that the Lord was coming, and it was a nightmare because I knew Mum used to say that we'll be saying, I think I might have said this, that who will be able to stand as we saw the cloud coming? She says, nobody will know that they are saved until they're caught up to meet the Lord in the air. And I thought, that's a shocking thing. And to me, it was a nightmare. And it wasn't. And the gospel set me free from that. And
can I add before you go on, because I think it's important for people to know that this experience that you later had and these these stories you're sharing that were, put the fear of God into, like in a very bad way, you eventually have become a Christian and don't call yourself an Adventist. And just for those watching who think that you haven't taken the trajectory towards the gospel and out of Adventism, just so they know, as you say this, what's kind of the outcome.
Well, the outcome of and I really, the burden rolled off my shoulders. One day, listening to Jim, my cousin, Kenton's dad, preach, and he was preaching up at a camp we used to have every Easter up on the Murray River, and text that I had heard many, many, many times, and I knew so well, as in Christ, all, no, what is it? As in Christ, all have sinned. No, as in Adam, all have sinned, and as in Christ, all have saved. Something, you know, the text.
Yes, I know what you mean.
But suddenly I realised that it had nothing to do with me, Adam's sin. My sin came as a result of Adam and Eve's sin. And I had nothing to do with the death of Jesus Christ other than that he died for my sins. And I realised that it was my decision. Did I choose to follow Jesus Christ and accept the free gift of eternal life that he offers? And because in John 3:16, whosoever believeth in him will not perish, but will have eternal life. That's pretty clear, isn't it?
Mm.
And that's when the burden really rolled off me. And from that instant on, I knew I can say to somebody today, I will see you in the kingdom if you believe in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Saviour. If you believe that he paid the price for your sins, and I can be certain that I know that I'm going to be there to meet my wife who's passed away 5 years ago. I know that I'm going to be there to meet my mates. And it's a tremendous load off your shoulders because I know that Christ paid the price for all of my sins. I don't have to worry because every breath we take, we probably sin in some way by just even thinking if somebody we don't like, and we think about if you hate a brother, you've committed murder already. So it was a release from the burden of being perfect.
Mm.
And that's when there was, you will well know that there was a movement went through Adventism on perfection.
Mm.
And that perfection, of course, was the most soul-destroying thing. Because if you've got to reach perfection, there's no hope for any one of us.
Mm.
And that was what Mum believed. One sin that you hadn't confessed would take you out of the kingdom.
Mm.
And so that's the freedom that I experienced.
And what year roughly did you hear that sermon from your brother Jim? A cousin.
That would have been about
just roughly.
That would have been in the 70s.
The 70s. Now, I took you off track, and thank you for sharing that. That's kind of the nutshell of what we want to hear today, and it's good to put it right at the beginning of our conversation. But you were talking about prior to that and prior to the revival that happened in 1948 in Warburton, there was this feeling of doom and like that your salvation wasn't assured. Tell us a little bit more about that time and then keep on bringing it up to 1948.
Well, I don't know. I've got a lot to add other than that came from, Mrs. White directly. The people that read Mrs. White today, if they read her thoroughly, they'll find out that this is all it was no message of her message of salvation was a message really of just perfection, which you can't reach and nobody can reach. And this really came to after Glacier View. This was when Glacier View really brought the gospel to the fore. That's what Glacier View was all about. And in Adventism, of course, They talk about the three angels' messages, and there's nothing in the three angels' messages that would give you confidence that you were going to be saved.
Mm.
And the sanctuary system was, there's no, in fact, the sanctuary system, if it's understood correctly, is virtually Christ dying as the sacrifice in our stead, whereas the sacrifices that were shown to Israel were just like a sand tray illustration of the gospel, and it showed how that there was no salvation without the shedding of blood, and that was the blood of Jesus Christ, who died for any and everybody who will accept that free gift. So
what do you say to people that say, well, Ellen White changed as she went on, and closer to her death, her understanding of salvation and righteousness by faith was greatly moved forward and was way more based on grace? What do you say to people that suggest that?
well, I don't know, because I lost faith in Mrs. White many years before that, and I haven't sort of. I've found better things to read than. I mean, as a young fella, even in my teens, I read the whole of the series of virtually go right through the history, right through to the Great Controversy. What's that series they call it? The
Conflict of the Ages.
Conflict of the Ages, yeah. I read that. I used to read E.G. White as much as I read the Bible. And when I was working in the timber, you know, I'd be camping in my camp, and every morning I'd read Mrs. White before I went to work, and as well as I read more Mrs. White than I did of the Bible at those days. And the messages to young people. I've never read anything that is so boring. I never got any message out of that. Young people, and I was a young person, but I read it out of duty because I thought there must be something in it for me, and I never got it.
And I guess what I was saying is that people who suggest that as she got older, she produced works like Desire of Ages that were way more grace oriented, but when you deep dive into Desire of Ages, you find actually not really. She's still
She
pointing to the law a lot.
She copied most of that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So really, she might have been given wisdom to copy some, because there is a lot of good stuff that she has said.
Yeah.
But it's that's mixed with some terrifying stuff, really.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
The perfectionism is still there within Desire of Ages, even.
Yes, yeah. And perfectionism is still within the church.
Yeah.
I've still got some contact with friends here in Horsham that are in the church, and when you mention that, I know that myself, I know that I'm going to be in the kingdom. I've got an absolute assurance of that. And he says, "Oh, but you've got to be obedient. You've got to." And he cannot grasp this fact. And there's so many people that I have met, Adventists, that are the same. Yeah, this free gift, they can't accept a free gift.
No.
There's a free gift, and every gift is free, but they can't get away from this obedience bit. And I illustrate this by saying, well, when I met my wife in Wolverton, I fell in love with her the first time I saw her. Had I gone to her and said, I love you, and I think you're my dream of a perfect partner, but here's a book of 500 pages, 1,000 pages, and it's got all the recipes that my mother made for me, all the good stuff. When you've learnt to do these perfectly, I will accept you as my wife. But you've got to do that first. She wouldn't have been my wife, would she?
No.
And people seem to think that that's, and the gospel and knowing Jesus Christ is all a love relationship. It's not, I didn't do any of that, or my wife didn't do any of that stuff to win my love, because she knew that I loved her. And I knew the same with her. But I knew that she would only do the best for me, and we're all human and we all make our mistakes. But fortunately, we can rectify that, and our love grows over the years. My wife, when she died, we were just greater sweethearts right through till the day she died.
Yeah.
Our love grew over the years.
Mm.
And that's what it is with Jesus. Our love for him grows, not because we're doing what he wants us to do, but because we have accepted the free gift that he's offered us. And we don't go and do anything that would deliberately harm him because of his love and because of the love that we've got in return. And so it's a love relationship. The whole gospel is a love relationship. And there's no greater force in the universe than love. Yeah.
And often people, and love is not about emulating the person you love. It's a loving relationship. And I think that's the good news of the gospel. It's about a loving relationship.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I'll just touch on again, when people say Ellen White was grasping the gift of salvation, and it's not that you have to do all this law keeping on your own. They say that the gift is Jesus comes into you, and it's him that does all this good stuff. But then you become like a puppet, and it's not. That's the marionette version of Jesus. Is that the right word? But it's not that at all. They've totally missed the point of the gospel.
If people were totally honest, when they say it's Jesus living out his life in us, it's not, because I know in my life, and nobody knows me better than me, that I've made many mistakes. I've done many, many things that Jesus would never do and would never sanction. But his blood covered that for me. He paid the penalty. And he gave me that gift, that multi-billion-dollar gift that just beyond comprehension.
Yeah, I like hearing you say that, and I like hearing you talk about you and your wife too, and what a loving relationship you had there. Now, Kenton, should you bring us back onto track with anything here that we're where are we at with the things we want to cover today?
Well, I think we've segued from last time's conversation, and the other thing we wanted to share today is Bruce's next thing. Bruce's memories of Warburton. So his memories of Warburton go back to 1927, pre-flood, which washed away the Science Publishing House and the Granos factory at the time. And I've shared with you some photos.
Yeah. Will I bring them on? Will I bring them onto the screen?
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, Ray has written, Bruce is right. The Jesus movement was all about a relationship of love with Jesus of Nazareth. Bruce is beautiful. There we go. That's thanks, Ray.
So this website's from a non-SDA, Bob Padula, but he has a chapter in there of some SDA memories. The SDAs used to have an historical website up there, but I can't see it anymore. But this has many, like the main photos.
I've just brought up the site here.
So if you look at that second photo down on the hill,
I'll see if I can double click it.
Yeah, see what Bruce has to say about that.
Share with us your thoughts, Bruce.
No. Well, that's the Signs Publishing Company that my dad was the manager of. And you'll see, if I think it's there, oh no, it may not have that wall around it, but they used to get small floods. And so they built about a 5'6" wall of concrete right around the signs from the hill over on the left to the hill over on the right. And when there would be a flood, they had floodgates that they would screw into the gateways, and there would only be limits of leakage come in, and they had a sump which pumped the water out, and that always dealt with any floods that they had before that. And then if you go onto the right-hand side of as you look at the photo, into that hill where that track's coming down, that's where the hill was dug out there, and the factory, SHF factory, was on the right of the signs, and it came out further to the front, further than the signs actually on the right there.
Oh, wow.
But when you're looking behind the signs, you're looking up the hill, that is Signs Hill.
Right.
And that track that's going up there on the right, that was what we used to call, it eventually became a cement track. But that track went right up the hill, and you'll see right at the top, you'll see the houses right up on the top. Well, people would work, the workers were living up there. They would, and everything, as I said last time, was controlled by whistles. The signs whistle would blow at 7:45 in the morning. That would give them time. No, well, you've got 1/4 to get to work. We'd blow at 7:50 to let them know that it was getting closer. And then 8 o'clock would be, they had to be there, so they should have clocked on. But they would run down that hill, down to the signs or the factory, and then every lunchtime, they would walk up that hill for lunch. Everybody went home for lunch.
Wow.
They had an hour for lunch, and the signs whistle would blow when it was 20 past 1 or something, whatever it was, letting them know it was, they had 10 minutes to get back to work. And then at a half hour, when they should be back, it would give a couple of blasts or 3 blasts, and they knew it was time to start work.
Oh, I love it.
That hill, you can see at the back the white sepulchre-like trees over the mountain ash that had been killed in an earlier fire.
Oh, right. Yeah, you can see.
So I mentioned that last time.
Yeah.
And those trees ended up and had to either be cut down for firewood or just fall over, which took them a number of years.
Yeah.
But that hill was, they bought the property and it was all on one title. So they just built houses where they liked, they put roads where they wanted to, and never ever had it subdivided because they owned the title to the whole lot, so they just built houses wherever it suited. And the school was right up at the top, and the church, I can't see really whether the church, there's a building, yeah, I think it is.
Up right there, looks like a church.
There's more photos down their website, Peter.
Let's go and have a look. Hey, Bud, just before we leave that one, I love the picture of the guy mowing the lawn down there on the front lawn of the sign. But him and, is it a police officer and someone else? Someone with an official-looking hat. They all seem to be looking up towards the camera, so they must have known it was being taken.
They must have, yeah.
And Bruce's dad built that publishing house.
Wow.
He didn't actually build it, but
He oversaw the building of it.
All right.
Yeah. But, yep, God.
So if you scroll down that web page, there's another photo of the 1930 of the publishing house and sanitarium, and it has that wall that Bruce is describing.
this the one?
Not go past the bridges.
Oh
Keep
yeah,
going. There you go.
this the 1930 one.
Yeah.
Wow.
So there's the
This
publishing
is
house.
quite a few years later, but that's the actual building that we just looked at.
I haven't got any of that on my screen.
It'll come up now. I think you should. How's that? Can you see that, Bruce?
No.
Not sure what to do there. Perhaps Kenton, if you describe it.
Okay, well, the publishing house has been extended towards the back, and I think Bruce's dad was a part of that, because he describes the second story where the manager just looked over the workers down the back.
I can see it now. Yep.
Yeah.
And you can see the wall that was around these signs. So just right up there and in between about the middle.
And on the right-hand side, you can see the Granos factory.
Yes, yep. So that was made mostly of concrete, the factory.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the signs in the flood, it came up level to the top of the second floor.
Wow. Boy.
The
fires and floods, everything was having a go.
Yeah, yep.
And this second picture is we're looking at the building that we saw where the man was mowing the lawn there in the front.
Yes.
Now extended back as well.
Yes. Yeah. It grew back not into the hill. I don't think they excavated. They had to excavate back into that hill for the back of the SHF factory. Yeah.
So it was quite like publishing was obviously good money for the church at the time.
Well, yes. And it was a thriving publishing house. And it only in those days, I don't know what they do now, but they only printed books for the church. It was all, and when the flood came, over on the left of that picture, there's quite a flat area before the river, and that was the mountain of books that had been taken out of the book room that had all been damaged with water. And books went all around the country. From people came up and went through the books and anything that was still readable. And for years after, you would see on people's bookshelves these water-damaged books.
Oh, really?
But when you look behind that signs now up on the hill,
yes,
see how they've planted all the trees?
Yes.
It used to be a bare hill. And as the houses were built there, the individuals planted trees and it became, they had beautiful gardens and vegetable gardens and then that hill where again you see where the fire had killed those.
Up the top.
That the same thing happened in the 39 fires. They went right through the top of that hill.
So the last photo we looked at, what year was that taken?
Well, that would be very early on, about 1914, Bruce?
Right.
It would have been around.
Trees would have taken at least 10, 15 years to grow that height.
Yes, yeah. No.
It's got a website here saying warburtonadventists.com.
Yeah, that used to be the one, but they've taken it down as far as I can see.
Yeah.
So if you scroll down to the next photo, there's a nice pic of Signs Hill in 1912 with more of the buildings that Bruce was describing.
That's this one. Oh, wow. So guide us through this one. Where's the signs?
I can't see it.
It's taking a while to load up.
Well, the signs would be at the bottom left-hand corner.
Yeah, okay.
But that road is the road up to Donoghue End that comes through the middle there, and you can see the hospital.
And then, so when was the hospital built?
Yeah, that hospital. I'm not sure the year it was built, but I was born in that hospital.
Wow.
In 1927.
Yeah.
And my sister, Merle, who was 12 years older than me, she was the accountant there from 19 1934, right until she married. And she worked there all her life.
The
And,
Johansen family has had a huge influence on the Australian landscape and beyond.
and see, that was through the Depression.
Mm,
And my dad was the only accountant registered as a cost accountant in Australasia. He would cost the price of a book. He would cost the price of anything. And he, because of the Depression, he couldn't afford to get Merle trained as an accountant, but he had all his books. He'd gone through Hemingway and Robinson's. And so he said, look, here's all the books. You study them all through, and which she did. And she never, ever, I don't know that she ever sat an exam except for my father. And she ended up, she was the accountant, and she was the most amazing person I had ever met. She was the most honest. She wouldn't even swap a railway ticket with me because it says it's not negotiable.
Yeah.
In the day of tax,
We've seen pictures of her in the last interview, I think, haven't we, Kenton?
That's right.
Yeah.
But that's the sanitarium, and now that's been extended a lot. That was extended out to the right, and on the left, that's where they built the hospital.
Right.
This was the Warburton Healthcare, no, the hydro they called it, because they did a lot of water treatments there.
What years was your father overseeing and managing all this sort of?
Well, he came to work when they first moved to Warburton. I think in what year would that be?
1906, Bruce.
Yeah. Well, he came up from the Echo Publishing House. So he was involved with that right sort of from the word go.
Wow.
And I'm just not sure what part he played then in the actual construction of everything. But he wasn't the actual manager. He was the accountant when he first went. He became the accountant, and then he was promoted because I was born. My sister Merle was born there in 1919, and I was born there in 1927. In between that, my dad was he was transferred to Wahroonga, so that the other three kids were all born in Wahroonga. The oldest and the youngest were born in Warburton. But he was the auditor for the division. He was the this is over his working period, and he died at the age of 43.
Oh,
and he had been the head.
I remember you saying that last time. Yeah.
Yeah, and he had been in that period of time. He had been the CEO, as they call it now, of the Sanitarium Health Food Company. He had been the chief auditor for the division. He had been, and he had done a trip to America with Dr. Sherwin, who was a doctor at the Warburton Sand there for years.
Well, he packed a lot in, didn't he?
Yeah, telling me.
What was his name again?
His name was Walter.
Walter.
And his father had been, prior to that, his father had been the manager. That was Johansen. And then after my dad's death, some years after that, Uncle Eric, who was Kenton's grandfather, he was the manager too. So there were three Johansens, managers of the signs. And my dad was the manager at the time of the flood, but he never knew it was of the flood because nobody told him, because he was so close to death.
Right. How did he die?
he died with mycosis fungoides,
Oh.
which is such a little-known disease that
Mm.
even today they know very little about it. And the fellow that used to play in the series of Yes Prime Minister and Yes Minister,
Oh, yes.
he died with the same thing.
Oh.
But my dad was only the second person in Australia ever to have it.
Wow. Any idea how one gets it?
No, but they said I was conceived when he first, at the time that he got it.
Wow.
And they said that it lasted, he researched it. They said it would last for terminal, there was no cure, will either last for 3 years, 7 years, or 20 years. And as he was getting towards the 6 years, he told Mum that he had read it all up in the library. And that's how he knew that he was getting towards the end, short of a miracle.
Right.
And it was a terrible thing. He was a second Job. He was ulcerated from the top of his head to the sole of his feet. It was one big ulcer.
How old were you at the time?
I was 6, and I turned 7 in the June before he died in the early days of December. And it was just a terrible, terrible death for anybody to die. And it's, yeah.
Yeah.
And the house that we lived in was up at the top, towards the top of the Signs Hill in Anderson Avenue. And it was a big old house that had been built by A.W. Anderson, who was the old dad of O.K. Anderson.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he built this house, which was it was the most amazing house. It had stairways about 8 foot wide that with big pillars on the sides.
Yeah.
And you went up the first lot of stairs and onto a platform. You turned right and you went up the next lot of stairs, which took you up to the front door. The whole of the front veranda into what we used to call the sitting room was all stained glass windows. And on the western end of the veranda, it was all closed in, again, all with stained glass.
Wow.
And then the house was a big house.
How did he afford that?
Well, A.W. Anderson, of course, this would have been probably back in the before 1920, I'd say. And building materials were cheap then, and people could afford to build houses like that. But
so he's the father of Roy Anderson as well. That was part of Question and Doctrine.
That's right. Yes, he was. Yep, and I knew all the Anderson boys.
Yeah.
My dad grew up with them, and they were mates. They worked together, and
was O.K. Anderson. He would have been older than you, wouldn't he? Because he died.
Oh yes, yeah. But he was a tradad. Anybody that knew OK, he was a tradad amongst tradads.
Yes.
And he and I, he was the he was he was the boys in charge of the boys' hall. What do they call those fellas?
Is that was Dean or something?
Dean, yeah, Dean of men. And he and I were always mates. And he was there when I got kicked out. But he was a mate of mine right up till he died. Every time I was in Avondale, and he knew that I was involved with GNU, he knew that I believed the exact opposite to him.
Yeah.
And he would say, I would go and see him, and he'd say, Bruce, I'm amazed that you come and see me, because we don't believe anything near the same way. I said, I don't care, OK. I said, you're a mate, and I don't care what you believe.
Yeah.
I believe what I believe, and you're still a mate.
What did he say to that?
Well, he said, no, he said, I think that's wonderful. He was and
Isn't that
I was
interesting?
delighted to keep in touch with him.
Yeah.
We could think opposite and still be
Yeah.
mates.
Well, that's
Yeah.
very interesting because his brother was opposite in many ways too.
Was he? Yeah.
Yeah, Roy was more on the progressive Adventist side.
Yes, that'd be right. Yeah.
OK was on the Concerned Brethren side.
Yep.
Just a quick message here from someone you know very well. This is Beth Johansen. She's just written, great to see you, Bruce.
My
Good to see
cousin.
you, good to see you, Beth.
Good to see you, Beth.
And I'm just going to bring this up. I like to bring things up from YouTube because they disappear once the interview is over, whereas the Facebook messages stay over in the Facebook group. She's asked, this is Rosemary Keddy, is there a forum or list of ex-Adventists that fellowship on a regular basis? I'm Sunshine Coast, Wide Bay Area, willing to gather or travel. That's a very good question. And I think Sunshine Coast area,
it's north of Brisbane.
Yeah, north of Brisbane. There's people that watch the program that are involved with the former Adventist Fellowship, and they seem to have gatherings all over the place, Rosemary. So if you're still watching, maybe try and shoot me a message after the program. Write again what you have written on the YouTube there, and I'll write to you because it'll delete after the end of the program. So just write it again, and I'll see if I can put you in touch with some of the former Adventist Fellowship there. I run a program called Voice Life Fellowship, which is online. You can on YouTube, and we have a monthly gathering, which this Adventists and former Adventists gather into that. You might like to look that up as well. So, where are we up to, Kenton? Bring us back.
Well, I just think it's a good to footnote the era that Bruce is talking about there from like 1905 through till the 40s or 50s. The Science Publishing House was like the brains trust for the whole hill, for the hospital, for the school, for the church, for the health food factory. It was like what made the whole thing go. That's what people have told me anyway.
Would have been exciting to be a part of it. It's a little bit like the Adventist Hospital there in Wahroonga. There's something about it that there's this real kind of its own ecosystem.
And if you've ever been to the hospital there, if you go the outside, by the time they finished, was just like, to me, it appeared to be just plastered with asbestos. But on the inside, you can still see the old big bay windows and the nice staircases and the carpentry. It was a very pretty building.
The hospital is still there the way it was left when it was sold. The fellow that bought it was a very wealthy man, and he's maintained the gardens as good as they were.
Really? What is he doing with the property?
Nothing.
Nothing.
I believe that recently it was put on the market, and whether he sold it or not, I haven't heard. But it was a beautiful building and beautifully maintained. The hospital was a beautiful building, and that's, of course, what brought them undone. Was the hospital they built and spent $4 million many years ago. That would have been in the 50s, I reckon, and 50s to 60s when they finally sold the sand and the hospital and everything, because somebody had an idea that they could build the hospital. Specialists from Melbourne would bring their patients up there and would operate on them up in this modern, up-to-date theatre, and they would be housed in this hospital, and they would come up and visit them. Now, they didn't realise that specialists are only interested in working and making money, and to travel to Warburton to see a patient or to operate on patients was wasted time. They wanted close to where they work, which is in the city, and they wanted their patients to be in accommodation close to where they work. So they weren't going to come to Warburton. So it was poorly thought out. and that's what virtually,
Right.
yeah. And so they,
The supply and demand wasn't.
yeah, they had to sell,
Yeah. Okay.
and then
That caused a lot of stress, didn't it? There was a lot of consternation over the sale of it. And
yeah,
in recent years, there was some. What was going on recently?
2001 was when the sale went through.
Right.
yeah. And yeah, but it's been well maintained, and it would make an ideal conference centre or something like that.
Mm.
But the facilities have been maintained, and it's a great pity.
Mm.
That
That whole area would have been subdivided now, though, isn't it?
well,
the science publishing area and all the houses up the top.
Well, the first thing he did, he realised that even the roads hadn't been surveyed, so he had to have the whole of the Signs Hill surveyed, and each house had to be on its own title.
Right.
And the signs or the church thought it was too much money to spend. He got back his total price that he paid for the whole hill. It would be hundreds of, well, I'm not sure how many acres there is, but right up the top of the hill where the dams used to be for the hydro scheme, that was all beautiful ash, mountain ash and timber. And it's all private property. It could be logged. And there's a fortune of logs up there because timber in Victoria is almost no, you know, you can't cut trees down. But it's and he made all his money, got all his money back and more, just purely simply selling the house. And
wow.
But
so
getting
the actual hospital part of it is on its own separate title, and the original signs publishing part of it's on a separate title as well, is it?
No, I think it was all on one title.
One, okay.
And so when they sold the houses, they decided it was the best to sell the whole title, the whole hill, the whole Signs Hill. Everything was just sold to this fellow. And then later on, when they sold the factory, the SHF in Warburton, see the signs in the factory after the flood, they had to move it up from the river. They had to move it to higher ground so that the same thing didn't happen again. And so they went up the top of the hill from the bridge, and that used to be houses and shops and, you know, just a small town. Well, they bought a big area right from the river right up to the Presbyterian Church, and that whole area they bought very cheaply, bought the shops and all the houses, removed some of the houses and pulled some down, and then the whole area where the old SHF factory is today, next door to the signs, was excavated to probably 15 feet, and a huge amount was done with it, just with horses and scoops and ploughs. And I watched that being done, and I just watched the whole thing myself. I was most interested in that, and they had beautiful gardens, which are still there, surrounding the signs and the factory. And the fellow that bought the factory must have been a wealthy man too, but he bought it for a song.
Wow.
Because it was built at the end of the Depression. And I think the signs and the factory were built in the, what would they be, in the late 40s, I reckon. Anyhow, whatever it is, sometime after my dad died back to Warby and I was a kid. And because of the low cut in the Depression, this was in the end of the Depression, that building was cheap. And they built the signs and the factory for a song. In our terms today, it was built for a song. And they both won an architectural award. They're still listed as heritage listed or something like that. And today, there's still architects look at these as buildings to be admired
and studied.
Yeah. And so that's the reason, that's how they came to build them so cheaply. And then when they sold the factory, they sold it for about the price of a house. I think it was $250,000.
When was that?
That was back in
2001 again.
That's the 2001 sale. Wow.
No. Oh, hold on. Did they sell it at the same time?
I think so.
Because that's when my nephew by marriage, on my Jones side, Arthur Beecroft, he was the manager of the Wheat Bix, I think, in England. And then his son went over there when they sold the factory in Warburton. His son moved, he was an engineer at the factory. He disassembled all the machinery and they were to take it to the UK and reassemble it over there. And he said to them, "This is ridiculous. We could build it in the UK cheaper than what we could ship it over there, and we will have modern, up-to-date manufacturing, which is now nearly all automatic." And anyhow, they said, "No, you're going to take it over there." So they took it over there, they put it to one side, and he went ahead and built everything from scratch, and they had a modern, up-to-date Wheat Bix manufacturing centre. And but they made some foolish decisions, and that was one of them.
That was one of them.
Yeah.
Because there were a lot of upset people when they sold it in 2001, weren't they? Okay, you can bring us back on track. Where are we up to?
Well, it'd be nice to hear Bruce talking about what it was like to go to the school and other things like the community there. They had they grew a lot of their own food, didn't they, Bruce? All that sort of stuff.
We were virtually there. Everybody had an orchard. Everybody had a veggie garden, and most people had a cow or two, and it was a self-sufficient place. But the real beauty of the place was that at the end of the Depression, there was virtually no cars around, particularly in Warburton. My dad had a 1928 Chrysler because he was the manager of the signs, but there was very few. Some of the sawmill owners would have a car, but you could walk down the street, you could walk up the Donnabuang Road, and everybody walked to church. All the young people from the signers, from the factory and the signs and the sand, who lived up on the hill when church was over, we all just walked up on the road. The road was just all masses of people. And they would just, it was a wonderful, wonderful community because we would we would go to school.
And mainly Adventist community.
Yes, yeah. There was the town itself was down in towards Melbourne, but once you got up over the railway line, it was nearly all Seventh-day Adventists. And so it was just a big community. There was work for a lot of people at the factory. And they had the girls on the packing, so you had lots of girls from all over Australia that had come there to work in the factory. The signs had the bookbinders and the printing and all that side of it. And then the healthcare centre, that's where my wife came to Warburton to work up at the healthcare centre. And that's how I came to meet Joan. She was from Melbourne. But then you would have, earlier than that, but when I was at school, you would go to school with all your mates. You went through school. Then when you grew up, so many people went and worked in the signs or the factory or the hospital.
Mm.
And a lot of them stayed around so that your mates, you would go to choir on a Friday night. You would go to Sabbath school on Saturday morning. You would go to church in the afternoon. They had a tremendous, Ron Earls was working at the factory during the war because it was essential service. So a lot of ministers worked there to keep them out of the army. And Pastor Keith, he worked on the make in the factory. And he later became I think he was the in charge of I forget what they called it.
Yeah, like a foreman.
Anyhow, he was one of the heads.
Yeah, like a foreman.
One of the foremen.
Yeah, he was. Anyhow, I've forgotten the name. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of these fellas that worked at the factory, and I used to work there when I was at school because I.H. Batty was the manager, and his son, Orvin, who they used later called Bruce, so we were both called Bruce, but I always knew him as Orvin. We grew up together and were mates until he died 5 or 6 years ago. But it was a tremendous fellowship because you would walk everywhere you walked. Because it was so steep, there weren't many push bikes even. You just walked.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the church was up behind the healthcare centre, wasn't it, Bruce?
Quite high there on the right.
And the school was up the top, up on the hill as well.
Up above that, yeah. And then it was only later that they brought the school down to just across the river between the old signs and the new signs.
And this heyday you're talking about, it always interests me because we'll have on the one hand this kind of more negative view of Ellen White and Adventism, and it's kind of taking away from what the gospel is. But then often you'll hear stories of these really great little communities that enjoy hanging out together, and there's food and gardening and fellowship. How do you balance those two almost opposing kind of paradigm?
I see it as a progression because there was so much good in Adventism. You can't get away from that. I wouldn't be nearly 96 if it hadn't have been for the health message, as they call it, because I've been a vegetarian. I'm a third generation vegetarian. I've never smoked and I don't drink. I might have a social drink occasionally, but I basically haven't. I've lived a good, healthy life, and I thank Adventism for that. And the fellowship that I had, like Lester Hawkes, who was a missionary for years and years. There's still Hawkeses around in the church, and Lester and his brother, and we were all mates, and the fellowship was outstanding. And then an afternoon, I just had to tell you, they had fabulous youth meetings in the Saturday afternoon. And this Ron Earls, he later ended up managing for the Golden Fleece for Australia. Wow. He was involved. He was a salesman, and he'd been a salesman all his life. But he was a salesman for the health food company, and during the war, he worked at the factory. But he was a genius. he would put on a fabulous program for a youth program. It was just like a entertainment almost. And so after that, then the girls that worked at the Sand, they didn't start work till about 5:30. So after we finished the meeting, probably at 3:00, we would go off walking up along the channel, or up to La Falls, or up into the bush, and there were walking tracks everywhere, and we would roam the mountains, and just all one big happy family, and that was a real plus.
And what year was this guy Earl kind of there? What era are we talking about?
That would have been during the war.
Right.
That would have been, you know, from 39 through to 45.
Right. So we're leading up to this other revival, spiritual revival, that when you're ready, I'm keen to kind of segue from what you're talking about into.
One little memory worth just capturing before we move on is when the church burnt down. Do you want to describe that, Bruce?
Oh, that was in '94. That was when I went off to college. I turned 17 in that year, and I was at college when the actual fire was there, burnt the. Unfortunately, nobody was killed. My brother Keith, he was up on the roof with a fire hose trying to hose the fire, and they were.
So that was a church hall, wasn't it? That burnt down.
Was the church hall? Yes.
Yeah, I was showing a movie that caught a light, projector.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
And my grandfather lost half a finger.
They were showing a film, and the film caught a light.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't have the safety around the projectors that they have in later days, but the film caught a light, and of course it's so fire prone. The whole thing just went, and the place was it was in the middle of a social, and so everybody's there, and they just charge out, and the place burnt down. They rang the fire bell, which was just opposite the church, and but I never saw that because I was.
But you had family. And Kenton, you were saying your grandfather lost
I think
finger.
Granddad helped fight the fire and rescue people, and he lost half a finger, like in the as like an injury.
What was his name again?
That was Eric.
Eric.
Yeah.
Wow.
He was the manager of the signs at that time.
So that was a big thing that happened.
Yeah. Particularly in a close-knit community like that, it would have been quite impactful. What was the movie they were showing?
It would have been pretty tame, because in those days, if there was a kissing, if somebody kissed somebody, they put their hand over the projector so that kids didn't see somebody kissing.
I remember at Avondale College, now Avondale University, they'd show a movie, and this is in the early 80s, and they would have someone with a piece of cardboard, and whenever the kissing scene was going, they'd put the cardboard up in front of the projector, but we would sit just behind the projector so we could keep seeing it shown on the white cardboard. Classic.
So before we go back to the 70s, Bruce, did you want to talk about how you got kicked out of college?
Oh yes, tell us.
This is funny.
Well,
this is where I get to bring up my my little screen title here: Bruce Johansen, 95-year-old Christian rebel with a cause.
I was, and this is where, and again, in no way do I ever want to reflect anything on my mother. I told you last time that I knew that everything she did out of love. She loved me, and I was bathed in love from the day I was born. But she was the most beautiful lady, but she had these very, very strict rules. As growing up in this beautiful Adventist community, I was not allowed to go to socials put on by the church because my mum was afraid that they were
Corrupt you.
corrupting. Yeah, they were going to the dogs
Mm.
because they would play games that she thought weren't healthy.
Mhm.
Young people would be running around playing with their hanging on to each other, and
Mhm.
she saw that almost as dancing. So
Wow.
I was not allowed to go to any church function as a social thing because Mum thought the church was going to the dogs.
Mm.
And so when it came to a birthday party of one of my Adventist mates, I wasn't even allowed to go to that because
Mm.
I might be misled, or so I was really, really, really restricted. And if I looked sideways at a girl, I was in trouble.
Mm.
I was not to have a thing to do with girls. And a young bloke of 16, the hormones are working, and he sees a good-looking girl, and well, in those days, the was a totally different world to what it is today.
Mm.
But if you took a girl out and you gave her a hug and a kiss, that was as far as whatever that was.
It's as bad as it gets.
Yeah. But Mum wanted me to go to the signs and do something there and work in the office at the signs, and I didn't want to do that. And I thought, what am I going to do that Mum will? So I thought, now if I say I want to go to college, Mum will think that's great. And my sister Beryl was at home on furlough, and they talked it over, and Beryl said, yeah, no, it'd be a good idea if Bruce went to college. So I went to college in 1944, and I started there as I was doing ministerial and business, and I had ideas that one day I'd be conference secretary, treasurer. And anyhow, I went to college, and I had a cousin who's a doctor, Noel Stacey. He was school teaching in Warburton before he did his medicine. And he said to me, Bruce, I've got a girl, and her name is, so I won't repeat her name, but she's going to college this year, and I reckon you and her might make a good match. So I was looking out for her when we registered the first night at Avondale. She was looking out for me. So, of course, we registered, and then I said to her, let's go for a walk. So we went off walking together around the back of the factory and sat down there and talked,
Down by the Spring Bridge.
getting to know each other, and went back. And of course, so that was, I broke the rules on the very first night I was there. And anyhow, that friendship didn't last because she was too scared to break the rules. So I used to, one of the pastor's sons, he was on the faculty, and while they were away one weekend, so he invited a lot of us down and said, bring your girlfriend down and we'll go down and we'll all meet at Mum and Dad's place. So we went, after we left there, I went back, climbed up the fire escape and climbed through a window and went to bed. Nobody knew anything about it. And then one day, Sister Bunny, who was the in charge of the girls' hall, the preceptress, I think they called her, and because I used to work at the press and knock off at 10 o'clock at night, I was entitled to a late breakfast. And anyhow, one day she told me, Bruce, you're not allowed to have a late breakfast. you've been taking girls out after work. When the girls were packing until 10 o'clock, I'd knock off at 10 o'clock. And it was totally false. I never took a girl out after I knocked off work. And I was accused of that. But I would talk to them in the foyer, and I'd go to college and they'd go to the village or wherever they lived. And so when it came to the first term, I had an uncle in Sydney. One of my mother's sisters was married to a fellow who had a lolly shop at Stratford. And it was great because I used to go down there and get in the factory where they had a lot of girls on the packing line, and I'd yarn to the girls there, and I thought this was great, but I could help myself to all the lollies I liked, and it was heaven on earth nearly. And so anyhow, then at this same, I wanted permission. I had to have permission to go, and Mum wouldn't give me permission. So Ben McMahon was the principal, and he'd been the principal of the school in Warburton, and they lived across the paddock from me. And his son was Lynn McMahon, who later became doctor in Melbourne. We were mates. And so Ben, he was a good mate, and he was the principal. And so when I couldn't get permission to go down to Sydney, I thought, I'm not going to sit around and do nothing for these holidays, and I'll get a job. So I got a job with the local carrier going to Newcastle every day. I worked for him, and then when it came to Friday, he said, I haven't got to work for you tomorrow. I said, that's all right. So I jumped on the train and went to Newcastle for the weekend. And you could stay in the what is it? The
Hostel?
No, it was the anyhow, it was run by the. No, this is where my brain goes.
Like YMCA kind of thing. Or?
The YMCA.
Yeah.
And I could get a bed for 2 and 6 a night and 2 bob deposit for the key. So I'd stay there. And then because I was brought up, films were taboo. And I had in my mind that these pictures must be very evil stuff. And I thought, oh, this is going to be interesting. So I went to the pictures and I got hooked. And it was an interesting thing because they used to sack people at the signs and factory that went to the pictures in Warburton. And one fella got sacked for going to see a film that they actually a few years later showed in the health food factory on a Saturday night for the public. So he was really crooked on that. But anyhow, back to my story. So I came back on the train. The morning college was to start for the new term. And I thought, I won't get off at Dora Creek. I'll go on to Morisset and I'll get off there and walk across to college. So as the train pulled into Morisset, I look out the window. Who should be standing on the platform but Ben McMahon? So I thought, the train stopped and it was down a bit past him. So I jump out the train. I head off down towards the asylum. And I hear this running feet behind me. And Ben sings out, Bruce, where are you going? I said, I'm going to college. And he said, you're going the wrong way. And I said, am I? So anyhow, as we're driving back, he said to me, Bruce, I've done all I can do for you. While you were away, they had a faculty meeting and they accused you of taking girls out after work at 10 o'clock at night. And I said, I don't believe this about Bruce. let's go and find him. And he can speak for himself. Well, when they went looking for me, I couldn't be found. And my roommate, who was George Laxton, he said, they said, have you seen him? He said, I haven't seen him for a few days. Don't know where he is. So of course, when he went back to the faculty, they said, that's it. He's finished. He's not going to come here. He's not going to have another meal here. He's not going to another class. He's got to leave the college grounds on Monday morning.
Wow.
So Ben said to me, Bruce, have you had any breakfast? I said, no. He said, you better come home and have some with me. And then he had a talk to me and he said, Bruce, don't leave here feeling that you've done anything wrong. He said, you haven't done anything wrong. You've only broken a few college rules, which some of them are pretty ridiculous.
Mm.
And so then I got back to college and he said, you've got to leave college immediately. So I packed my bags and he said to me, I'd advise you not to go back to Warburton for the month, but go up and work for my brother-in-law, somebody Wheel up in near Murwillumbah. So I said, righto, I'll do that because I didn't want to go back to Warburton. I was free. And so my grandmother, Faith Johansen, who was a saint, the most loving and lovable woman, and O.K. Anderson said to me, Bruce, you've got the most amazing grandmother. Everybody knows her and everybody loves her. She's welcome in every house in Avondale. She hears all the confidences of everybody. She knows all about everybody. She never, ever repeats a confidence. She never repeats anything and everybody loves her. And so she came over to see me and I'm packing my bags up on the 3rd floor in the boys' hall and somebody sang out and said, your grandmother's looking for you. So I went down and I thought, oh, I'm in for a lecture. She just hugged me and she said, Bruce, I hear you've been in a bit of trouble. Here's a bag of biscuits that I baked for you, and here's the socks that I mended for you, and patted me on the shoulder and said, be a good boy and all the best. And had she given me a lecture, it would have stirred me, it wouldn't have meant anything, but that love just really, was so special. So I had this packet of biscuits and then I went to Newcastle on the train and I bought my ticket to Murwillumbah and they said the train goes at 11 o'clock at night. So I wander around Newcastle for the day and at 11 o'clock at night I'm at the station at Hamilton and the no train had come to go to Murwillumbah. And so anyhow, the station master said, where are you going? I said, to Murwillumbah. He said, no, train only ever goes every second night. Doesn't go till tomorrow night. So I had to fill in the night in Newcastle with no money. I had about 50 cents in my pocket. So I was going to sleep in the park. I'm sleeping on the bench and it started to rain. Oh. I thought, oh man, I can't sleep here. And so I went to this YWCMA and I said, I haven't got enough money to pay a deposit for the key and for a night's accommodation. They said, well, we'll let you into your room and we won't give you a key. So that's all right. Then the rest of the day, I just had to fill in a day wandering around, no money for food or anything. And I'd eaten the biscuits. And fortunately, Mum had sent me a birthday cake. So I had this birthday cake and these little bag of biscuits my grandmother had given me. So I got on the train eventually the next night at 11 o'clock, very, very hungry. And it was full of soldiers because it was a wartime. and there's a soldier sitting next to me, and he got off it. They used to get off at the stations and get food, and in those days they had restaurants at the stations. So he got off. He came back with a bag of pies, meat pies. And he said, "Oh, here, Bruce, have a pie." Well, I was so strict a vegetarian that I wouldn't eat a pie if I was starving, which I was. So I said, "No, look, I'm right, thanks very much." I'd finished my cake and what I had. So, of course, we travelled all night and the next day, and then we got to Murwillumbah at 9 o'clock the following night. So this was 3 days, you know. I'd been a day in Newcastle and a day at night and a day on the train. And then I get to Murwillumbah and I'm looking for Mr. Wheel. Everybody goes off the platform and there's the station master and a carrier. And he said, "Do you know Mr. Wheel?" "Oh, yeah," he said, "he used to be at such and such a place, but he's moved away and he's gone to and Ben McMahon had just sent him a telegram and said Bruce was coming and I'd be prepared to work for him for a month. Well, he didn't ever get that telegram, and I got there and I said, I'm thinking, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
And I remembered that a neighbour from Warburton had bought a property in Upper Burringbar, and he had a property that he used to lease to people to grow bananas on. So I said to the station master, I says, "Where's Upper Burringbar?" He says, "It's back down the line." And I said, "When's another train go back?" And he says, "Oh, it goes 7 o'clock in the morning." So I said, "How much does it cost?" He says, 1 and 6pence a ticket. I said, "I haven't got any money." He says, "Don't worry, get on the train and I'll tell the train driver to stop at Upper Burringbar siding. There's nobody there. You'll just get off at the siding and you'll be right." So that's how I got back to Upper Burringbar. And in the night, there was a rip-roaring frost, and I was sleeping on the station, and I used to get up, I'd sleep for half an hour and then get up and run for half an hour and try and get warm and get back. Anyhow, I get down to Upper Burringbar and I could see bananas on the hill. So I headed up towards them. And I get up and I met some fellas on the road working, and I said, "Is this where the Edwardses live up here?" And he says, "Yeah." So I got up there. I came round into this little community, and here's Mrs. Edwards. She said, "Oh, Bruce, have you come to see your auntie?" I said, "I didn't know I had an auntie here." And she said, "Oh, yes." She says, "You've got your auntie Greta, who was Greta Barham." And I said, "Oh, yeah, I didn't realise that she was here." So then I had another auntie that was there, and that was Thelma Rosendahl, who was my father's youngest sister. And so anyhow, I had two aunties there. So then the auntie Greta said to me, and they were living in a cowshed divided by Hessian. The bales were divided by Hessian for different rooms, and they were building a house. Uncle Roy was building a house himself and working in his bananas as well. So they said, "You can just, have you had any breakfast?" And I said, "No." And she said, "We've had our breakfast, but here's a packet of wheat bix, big packet of wheat bix, and plenty of milk. So you just help yourself and we'll go about our tasks." Well, here's me, starving after 3 days, no food and only water to drink. And so I sit down and I eat the packet of wheat bix and clean the wheat bix up. Auntie Greta came back, and I'm sure that she took one look And she thought, I'd rather keep this bloke for one meal than have him for a week.
He'll eat me out of house and home.
So, but before dinner time, she'd gone off to the biggest banana grower in that valley, who wasn't an Adventist, and she'd got me a job with him, and he would board me. So she got rid of me quick smart. She thought I'd break her.
What a great story.
Awesome.
So I stayed up there, and of course, then my auntie must have sent word back to my mum that Bruce was going a bit wild, and I wasn't going to church, and I wasn't. I was going out into town of a weekend and Sabbath in the town, and we'd go to the pictures Saturday night, and anyhow, I'm having a great time. So I thought, I'm not going back to college in a month. I'm staying where I am. So Mum would write me a letter and say, Bruce, come home. You've got to come home straight away. And I would say, write a letter back, and this all took time. And I said, no, I can't come back yet. I haven't got enough money for a ticket. So then she's getting desperate. And so time went on. She'd send me a telegram, and I'd just send a telegram in reply saying, sorry, can't come yet, letter following. So finally, Mum realised she wasn't going to get me home. So Keith, my brother, was married by then. She went over to see him, and she says, I can't get Bruce to come home. What am I going to do? So he said to Mum, of course you're not going to get him home. You know, he's not going to come home to be under the thumb, that you had him under the thumb. He said, the only way you'll get him home is if you promise me that you'll let him come home and live the life of a normal young teenage man. And Mum was desperate to get me home, so she said, righto. So Keith met me and took me, and as we're going home, he said, now, Bruce, don't you remember, these are the conditions, and you live up to these conditions from day one. Mm-hmm. If Mum says, where are you going? I tell her, right, I'm going down to the social. Just leave it at that. And if you get home late, a bit later, just say, yeah, I took so-and-so home tonight, and, just be open, but do what you're going to do and live your own life. Mm. Because Kenton's, not Kenton, my sister, young sister Phyllis, she thought, well, because she was under the thumb and working at the signs, and she thought, oh, how does Bruce get away with all this? He's free and I can't. And so that's how she got me back home, and I lived a normal life, and that's where I met my wife, and we went together for 4 years and finally married, and we were married for nearly 70 years before I lost her. But
yeah,
that's
just what a great little series of stories there. And
one of many.
Oh, look, I love it. I love it. It's interesting. We're officially our heading is 70's SDA Jesus Revolution. And what I'm really pleased, though, is we're creating this sense of history that builds up to these moments within this Adventist culture that I think it's really important for people to hear, because it creates this context, a really big context. So, yeah, I really value listening to these stories. Can you tell us a little bit now, when you got back, what year was that roughly? And tell us about this revival of the 1948 and what.
Well, when I got back, that revival was when I was 12. That was in the 17th of June in 1949.
Okay.
This war had just been declared, and I was going home at midnight from this revival night. The church was stayed there. They had stayed there and prayed and confessed to each other all night. That night, at 12 o'clock, two of my friends, Basil Barnard was one of them that we talked about last time,
Yeah.
and Hayden King, who were both Adventist fellows, and they were taking me home. And at 12 o'clock, I looked at my watch and I said, "Oh, it's my birthday." It was 12:05. "Oh, your birthday? Yeah. Well, what do we got to give you?" So Hayden pulled out a packet of Chewy and says, "Here's for your 12th birthday." So that was when I was 12. That was in 1949.
39.
39.
39.
39, yes.
You were 17, you were 17 and went to college in 44.
39, yep.
So what year did you move back to Warburton after these stories you were just sharing?
I went home and lived at home.
What time? What year was that, though?
That was 44.
So
That was
44
the
you
end.
went to college.
That was the end. I went to college in the beginning of 44.
And then when did you come back?
I did a term. Then I went up to work, and I worked in the bananas up until I came home in about September
Of what year?
of 1949.
Right,
No,
okay.
wait on. 44. 44.
Oh, so that same year. So all that stuff happened in that 1 year.
Yeah.
And what's also interesting is that Phyllis, the sister that he's talking about, that's Graham Fromfelder's mother.
Mother, yeah.
So she was the first female to take on a youth leadership position in the church.
Yeah.
So she was the youth director for the Victorian Conference back in the 50s.
Wow.
She was
a lot of people were trying to open things up and be fresh and relevant.
That was when Pastor Judd, Claude Judd, was the young people's leader, and Phyllis was his secretary.
Wow.
And that's how she came to meet her husband, Keith Frauenfelder. Was when because she would never have been allowed to meet a fellow if she'd have stayed in Warburton, and she got away from under Mum's thumb.
Because of your mum.
Yeah, and Mum, as I say, only was purely and simply
Pure from love. Yeah.
It was all done in love.
So
and when you talk about the freedom of the gospel, Mum, the fact that Mum was a tradad won't keep her out of the kingdom.
No.
Because she really missed out on the freedom of the gospel. Mum never knew of a certainty that she was going to be saved. Whereas I knew, and I still know that I'm going to be. I've got that assurance. Now, Mum went through life fearful that she had one unconfessed sin that would keep her out of the kingdom. And what a terrible thing to go through life thinking like that. And so Mum was bound under the guilt of sin, that she didn't grasp the fact Christ had paid that price. She had a free gift of eternity that she didn't know. And she probably get the kingdom and be shocked to see me there. I was a bit of a heretic, she thought. And because I associated with Baz Barnard and people of the wrong side of the road, and they were still going to church, but they weren't really.
So bring us back to you. You get back to Warburton in 1944, and you eventually meet up with your wife, settle down. But I'm really keen to hear, what are those years from 44 to 48? You were in Warburton?
I was in Warburton. My brother Keith.
Tell us how that led up to this revival of 48. What was the build up to that? Because weren't you saying there was a really big Holy Spirit revival in Warburton in 1948?
That was at the beginning of the war.
That was 38.
Yeah, I was still only a teenager then. That was when I turned 12.
Yeah.
That was before the story I told you.
So the revival wasn't 48; it was 38.
It was 38. Yes.
Oh, okay. Somewhere in the beginning of the conversation, someone said 48.
No, it was
Okay,
38.
I see
38.
why we're having that
Yeah,
disconnect there.
yeah.
Okay, right.
No, then when I came back from Mooloolaba working up there, my
Yeah,
brother was in the timber industry, so I went working for him
right.
up at Matlock, and the 39 bushfires had burnt all the mountain ash up
Yes.
in that area. And as I described it in the picture of Warburton, those white sepulchres of just trunks of trees
Mm,
were there by the million, and they were still good for timber
mm,
for a certain number of years. So there was hundreds of trucks and carting logs out of Matlock,
mm.
and we were cutting pulpwood, and we had heaps of trucks that were subcontracted to us, and we had our own trucks that we were carting the timber down to the my paper mill at Morwell, so that there was the roads were just chock-a-block with trucks and logs and pulpwood, and so I spent oh, till a few years there. This is where it
Well,
gets.
yeah, it gets hazy.
Well, I worked in the timber,
Yeah.
and of course I met Joan in 1940. Yeah, I came back from up north in the end of 44, and then I met Joan on the 7th of May, 1945,
Wow.
at midnight.
Mm.
That's another story.
Story. So, Kenton, bring us back onto track with some thoughts that Bruce may have that build up to the 70s now with regards to your dad.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting, like with families, as you would know with family history, families follow patterns.
Mm,
And the relationship that Bruce had with his mum, Susie, was much like the relationship I had with my own mum, Moretta. And when my mother and father's relationship came unstuck, mum retreated to Ellen White and read Ellen White all the time. She had a job crossing kids across the road in the 1970s, and I used to go to the John Carter Mission, in town, and I used to think like Bruce thought that I wouldn't live to be married or to have kids. And this is the late 1970s, early 1980s, and all those themes that Bruce had to struggle with, as a young person, I had to struggle with as well. Even though my father was like gospel centered,
Isn't that interesting?
my mother was very conservative and an Ellen G. Whiter. So
you're influenced by her.
I find that very interesting. That was all happening like in parallel universes.
Yes.
In the 70s.
Which is often an Adventist kind of thing, isn't it? Adventists have to live within this kind of crazy good on both sides, but this kind of, on the one hand, it's quite, as I love Bruce calling it, trad-ad, and on the other side, it's here's your dad ushering in this kind of new gospel revolution of Jesus.
Yeah, so I'm not.
And at the same time, here's you in the middle of it.
Yeah, so
still having to deal with this. You're still not being liberated. You've still got this kind of juxtaposition between the two.
So what's that phrase trad-ad mean? Like I'm not
traditional Adventist.
All right. Okay, so I always found the conservative judgmentalism. It didn't marry with what I knew about Jesus and what I knew about the gospel, and I actually didn't make sense of it till I was 1,000 kilometers away from home at Avondale. And it became very apparent to me that, Dad was more on the gospel progressive side of Adventism, and Mum was more on the literal conservative side of Adventism. And I had to sort of like balance the two, because I'm obviously a product of both of them.
Yeah.
So,
every Adventist child is.
I said that to Dad. I said, look, I don't know how you remained married because you're opposites. And Dad said, well, can you tell your brothers and sisters that? That's exactly the case. So
Wow.
that's a little bit of a segue, if you like.
I like that segue, because in many ways, this conflict within Adventism is something that really interests me, because in my opinion, there's no chance of restoration, but there might be a chance of resolution. Maybe this kind of, like, it's not a left and right of standards. It's a left and right of theology. It's a left and right of Ellen G. White, or, Ellen White's a prophet, Ellen White maybe, maybe not. That's your two groups. And that tension causes within me, within Bruce, within you, as we grow up, incredible amount of tension. One minute we feel fear, one minute there's grace. Bruce was able to break away from that.
Yeah.
No, I think you've been able to break away from that. I've certainly broken away from that. So I think it's important to talk about and to have these stories, because it's almost, there needs to be an end to this kind of crazy tension that's not just your normal tension that you find in other mainstream denominations. I'll get swung at for that, but
that's all right. Be honest. I remember when I was about 21, I was still at Avondale doing theology, and I had Mum and Dad by myself for the first time in like my entire life since I was 6, on a little bushwalk up around Marysville.
Wow.
And I said to them, we were just mucking around like on a track going nowhere to a waterfall. And I said to them, this is the first time I've ever had you together, like to myself, since I was like 6.
Wow.
And what I find amazing is that, I'm the product of both of you. And even though you may not be able to get along, I have to marry you in my own head and heart to get along,
Yeah.
So,
Love it.
yeah, you're right. We have to, as Adventists, we have to come to grips with this juxtaposition where we're pulled in separate directions, but we have to find a way forward where we're wiser and we don't make the same mistakes that historically some before us may have made, and learn from it.
Yeah.
That's any use.
That's really, really good, because you kind of personify this kind of bigger metaphor of what I think is going on within Adventism. The church has kind of got this strange marriage between the conservative and the progressive.
Yeah.
And the children of that marriage are never truly set free and liberated in a way that I think is healthy.
No.
And yes, all organizations, all movements, all have this kind of problem, but it's usually because of one thing at the top is causing a problem to trickle down. This is a marriage at the top between two distinct theologies within one church that is creating this bunch of children that just continually have a mental health, metaphorically speaking, issue within the Adventist church. And I hear Bruce talking about the liberation and freedom he's got now, that he's a Christian, he doesn't identify as an Adventist. And it seems to be that the only way people can truly break is kind of to leave your family. And I'm hoping that these conversations lead to some kind of resolution.
Yeah.
So that people can, that maybe the parents in the Adventist church, these two left and right theological, can either live together in such a way that it creates a healthy space for the children, or people find an easier way out.
Well, fortunately, like I have found my own way, like Bruce.
Yeah. Yes.
And I am also fortunate that even though I might not agree with all my family, I've remained in the family. I haven't been ostracized for thinking differently. So maybe that's a model.
The Johansen family. Are you talking about
and
the Adventist family?
Even though on my mother's side as well, they haven't ostracized me for thinking differently and for thinking for myself. So maybe that's a model of what we can achieve.
Toleration.
Yeah.
See, I look at I look at your family, the actual Johansen family, the breakaway groups, the subsidiary families or whatever extended family, that's the word I'm wanting. You know, your Fraunfelders, your Hares, this Johansen family. I see you collectively as a kind of bunch of people that without certain restraints in the real world would have flourished beyond measure. And this, because of this Adventism that has this bad marriage of the conservative and the progressive, the children of this never truly flourish.
Well, I disagree.
Unless you're a Doug Batchelor.
I'll give you some hope.
Yeah, give me hope.
If you talk to Bruce a little bit more, you'll find out each one of his children have been overachievers. They've just achieved astonishing things.
He's not an Adventist.
No, they were all brought up Adventist. And the other thing I'd like
Are they still Adventists?
I'll let Bruce answer that question. But the other thing I'd like to say is I asked Bruce on this very topic what he made of it. And I said to Bruce, as you've just described, I said to Bruce, where have we gone, Bruce? What have we done? Like, what's happened to all the Johansens that used to be in the church? And you know what Bruce said? Bruce said, we found that Jesus was bigger than the church. And we found him on the outside. Yeah. That's what Bruce said. And I think that's a pretty neat summary.
I love it. And I agree with that, Bruce. Yeah. But that's what I'm saying is that finding that if you're trying to find Jesus on the inside, or if you're trying to be Mr. and Mrs. Ellen White lover, the church structure is not going to set about pushing you into a flourishing, abundant world. It's going to restrict you unless you toe the line of the mainstream, the conservative parent. I don't know whether it's the mother or the father. The conservative parent within Adventism holds these, you know, a little bit like Bruce's mother, where lovely people, but they are full on restricting its members.
Yeah. I liked your model of family and children. And to me, the church is a little bit immature. It hasn't grown up to sort of like love the child but also give the child flexibility and freedom to discover the world for themselves.
Yeah. Boy, there's some good metaphors flowing here.
I've thought about it for many years.
This conversation is now an allegory for Adventism.
Yeah, so I think the church needs to, in some ways, take a step back. And for me, the things that are important to the church may be different to other people, but for me, the things that are important to the church are very simple. Things like the Sabbath, things like the salvation Jesus has achieved for us. Things like the health message, things like the rest and the peace that we get from believing.
Are we really getting rest and peace? These are the things I would challenge.
Well, I found them.
Yeah.
And I found them out. I found them probably, like you say, more outside of the church than the inside.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't truly view you as an example of a child that's of these two parents that stay within the oppressive system, the family. You seem to have to leave the family or come back on your own terms.
But what's weird, Peter, is that the reason I'm having this conversation with you and Bruce is because I love my origins. I love what the family has achieved, and I celebrate that as well, even though like I've extended it and reinterpreted it and recreated it into something else.
But even people with Stockholm syndrome love their new family. I'm just saying, by their fruits. Often an Adventist that stays within the church or can't somehow compromise, be their own person within the church, unless you can do that, the fruits show demonstrably that people don't flourish.
No.
They might become a good business person outside of the church. They might become a really great person. They might run great Sabbath school programs. But unless you're towing the line of whoever this dominant parent is within the church, the conservative one, you do not flourish within the church structure. If you want, unless you toe that line, like, for example, there is no independent Doug Batchelor of a liberal progressive style Adventist.
Doesn't happen.
You cannot flourish. You know, there's the education system, even though it pushes at the boundaries as much as it can, is still restricted by having to teach Ellen White. Even at grade 2, my daughter was coming home. Ellen White, Daddy, she's amazing. It seems to be structured in a way
Yeah,
that
it's holding
not
it back.
allow you to just flourish.
It's holding it back. And coming back to the 70s, you had people like Des Ford, which Bruce is a part of as well, you know, visioning a church that was gospel based.
By the way, that's Gillian Ford just wrote, hello, Bruce and Kent.
G'day, Jill.
Yeah, you had people like Des that was visioning what a church could be if it just got back to scripture and made that first. And the church sadly made a decision to reject it. But even though the church embraced it like 30 years later, it was too late. They lost all that impetus and all that vision and that youthful energy that got lost in the intervening years.
And the embracing of it's lost as well now.
Is it?
40 years later now, it's as bad now as it was when Bruce was a teenager, when you were a teenager, when I was around college in the early 80s. It is as bad as ever.
And as I used to say, Adventist 30 years ago, I used to say, look, God is much bigger than Adventism. And if God's much bigger than Adventism, God was around before Adventism. This is stupid stuff saying simplicity, but if God's bigger than Adventism, God's on the outside of Adventism as well, and you'll find him there. And I used to say to my friends, because I'm a bit of a greenie, I used to say, well, to me, I like the vision that Paul casts of scripture, that scripture is found in the natural world. It's not just written down on a piece of paper. And that's where I find peace, and that's where I find meaning, and that's where I rejuvenated, you know, as I go bushwalking or cross-country skiing or cycling in those open spaces. I am reacquainted with, you know, the Creator, and I'm earthed. I'm brought back down to earth.
And Bruce, I'll let you speak in a moment, but I think another reason that I'm trying to bring about mini-series of finding Jesus in the 70s, Jesus within Adventism, people like yourself, Kenton, have found it in that way, this little gem. So in many ways, what I'm trying to do is bring out your kind of story, but simultaneously bring out the Bruce kind of story, where, like Bruce said earlier, when I was about to put, you know, SDA, Rebel with a Cause, no, he's a Christian, you know, that's his first focus is on Christianity. And this is my thought on this, take it away, I might be wrong, but in my mind, Bruce has gone, okay, Jesus is bigger than the Adventist church, but I'm also leaving the Adventist church. You've gone, Jesus is bigger than the church, but I'm going to make that work within the framework. And I'm saying that both of those are good things. And I'm trying to get all the people that are viewing Adventism like you, and there's many from this 70s Jesus revolution period that are still alive and well now, try to say, hey, why don't you guys get together a bit more? And this light is still shining, you know, hang out, get together, sing music.
Yeah. It's hard. It's hard because I did work in the system for, if you include my sanitarium years and Avondale and theology, 10 years of my life, like within the confines of earning a wage.
You were an actual Adventist pastor, weren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, with the church, the members chew up the pastors and spit them out. That's the life of a pastor. And
in a healthy church, you'd think that the pastoral care of pastors would have a greater focus.
You'd hope so. Like, there were some beautiful members that looked after me and loved me.
Yeah.
But for the most part, that was my experience. And I talked to ministers that have been spat out since, and that's their experience. And what also amazes me is the ministers that stick and stay with it. And they, even though I'm a marathon runner, they got more endurance than what I have got. I cannot last that distance.
Yeah.
So the church has a lot to learn, and it hasn't really taken on the lesson.
It's an interesting denomination, isn't it? Like we're talking about these great time periods where Bruce is hanging out at Warburton and they're having a great time, great community. And then we're talking about how much Ellen White has instilled fear into our lives and stuff. And people leave but want to stay connected, and people don't like it, but they want to find Jesus within it. It's a really fascinating denomination.
It is.
I find even more so than Mormonism and JWs. I think, and those three are on a par.
Yeah, well, like
Adventism, JWs, Mormons.
If I talk to somebody like Milton Hook, okay, I respect Milton Hook. He describes to me like early Adventism, which is a very simple Adventism, and it's the Adventism that gave birth to the Warburton experience. And I think the problem with Adventism is it started off anti-creedal. It didn't want to have a list of beliefs. It was anti it. It was even mentioned in the preface to the fundamentals, 27 fundamentals. But over time, it's taken on all this garbage and it's set things up in concrete so they can't be moved. So there's no room for growth.
That's why I again encourage go and read this book, because
I'm going to give it
it's very rare for me to be able to say, wow, an academic scholar is saying the same things I've been saying, and no one believes me because I'm not an academic or a scholar. And I read some page, I thought, that's what I've been saying. Wow, yeah. It's so interesting to have someone of his caliber not agreeing with me. Like, this is he wouldn't even know my thoughts. But in this, there's a suggestion that this idea, this notion that there was a time Adventists were doing this good stuff, is not true.
Is it not true?
Okay. The DNA of Adventism is legalism to its core.
Okay. Maybe I don't know everything.
Now, I'll bring up Ray because I like when he disagrees with me. I strongly disagree, Peter. People who become born again while captured by the Adventist demonic cult must leave immediately. By staying, a person will support a dangerous spiritual counterfeit. Thank you for saying that, Ray. I appreciate you saying that. And I guess that's why I left myself. I guess what I'm trying to find, and what I'm referring to, is there are good Adventist people that have grasped this gospel, this Jesus. And I'm trying to shake them, Ray. I'm trying to say, guys, what are you doing? Are you fully trying to bring about Jesus and the gospel within Adventism, or are you separate from Adventism but still remaining subculturally connected? I'm trying to create this discussion where people start thinking about, why am I doing what I'm doing? Am I supporting?
It is hard. It is really hard. Like when I was a minister, there'd be other ministers or people in the conference office who would say, if you don't believe all the beliefs, get out. Go.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Because you've got people paying tithe that do believe them.
Yeah.
And that would be like, to me, a young minister who's trying to come to grips with reality, it'd be like a kick in the guts. Because I'm doing my best to bring people over the line and to share Jesus, and then I'm being told just to piss off.
Yeah. And this is what I'm saying, this flourishing thing. Like I personally... And I'm going to hand it to you, Bruce, because you've been waiting very patiently. You've got some good thoughts to share here. I'm not encouraging people to leave, but I am trying to shine a light on those people who grasp the gospel of the good news of the gospel from Jesus, and they are Adventists. But I am also challenging them, that group, to say, can you fully flourish as a Seventh-day Adventist? You might have some other options. And I never want to be the person that's kind of sounding like I'm calling people away from something, because I understand this strange connection where you love it. You love Adventism. But on the other hand, it's kind of messed up your dreams when you were 7. It's formed this narrative in your world that's in some ways stunted and marginalized your spirit, your soul. There's some things you might want to read into that.
What do you think, Bruce?
But Bruce, what are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, I don't think that, how can I put this? Adventism, the only thing that I see, there's many churches around the world that keep the Sabbath. That's not a distinctive Adventist doctrine.
True.
And yet Adventists claim that you've got to be an Adventist to keep the seventh day, or else you won't get the kingdom. But then what's the other thing that makes them distinctive is the sanctuary question, which is unbiblical. That you cannot prove their sanctuary business as biblical. So that's why they could not agree with Des Ford, because the sanctuary is the only thing that really makes them stand out as a distinctive church. Now, to me, I've tried for a long time to have a revival within the Adventist church and to get them to understand the gospel. But because they've got this thing about Mrs. White, I say Mrs. White's got a big, whatever they claim Mrs. White to be what they claim her to be, and whatever they stick to the sanctuary question, and yet I talk to Adventists today, they don't know what you're talking about when you talk about the sanctuary question. And Mrs. White seems to be the biggest stumbling block. And I can't really see, I've told you before, how I can be a witness to people of any faith and all faiths, and I can talk to them as man to man and get them to see that the gospel, as John 3:16 states, we all know that, I don't need to repeat it. It is so definite that believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and you will be saved, not might be, but will be. And I've talked to fellas, because I've been in the business world all my life and been very successful at what I was doing. But I could talk to people, and one old contractor that I used to sell Caterpillar earth moving gear to, he came back to Warburton, to Horsham, and I didn't know that he'd come back here, and he said to one of his old drivers, "Is Bruce, see Bruce at all? If you see him, tell him I'm here and I'd like to see him." So I went back and made contact with this Sam, and we were good friends before in business, but we became very close. And he was not a well man. And as he's going downhill, I could see he was going downhill. And I just befriended him. I'd call and see him every week. And I would have a talk to him. He was a royalist. He communicated with the old Queen Mother, our just past Queen, her mother. He communicated because he was a Scotchman who lived up near Balmoral, and he knew the Queen personally. And he used to communicate with the old Queen Mother. But we talked about everything. And I could see he was going downhill. And I would talk to him about the gospel and about how he felt after, when he was facing death, how he felt about. And I talked to him about the gospel and how simple it is. And anyhow, he said to me, "Bruce, I have never allowed anybody to ever talk to me about things like you talk to me." And I said, "Well, why is that, Sam?" Because he said, they've got an agenda.
Yes.
Everybody's got an agenda.
Right.
And he said, and you haven't.
And you know what? Can I just add to that? Not only if you're an Adventist and you don't have an agenda, that the people listening to you talk think you've got an agenda because you're under that brand.
That's right.
And you were able, because you were coming across as perhaps like not bringing Adventism into it at all.
No.
He loved that you didn't come to him with an agenda.
Yep. And he said, "I can't get anybody to cut my hair." I said, "I'll cut your hair." I used to cut the boys' hair. So I used to cut his hair. And to me, it shows the necessity to make a friendship. You've just become a friend. And he he went to his grave, and I was there with him just as he was dying, just before he died. And it was providential because his son, who owns the biggest brothel in Melbourne, and he was ashamed of him. He's a multi-millionaire who he is, but he was ashamed of his son, and he was there with his dad. And miraculously, he had left the room before I got there. And I had a talk to Sam, and I said to him, Sam, we'll be there. I'll meet you in the kingdom. I'll meet you at in the resurrection. And he grasped my hand and gave it. He couldn't talk, but he could grip my hand. And it's I don't see, this is from my point of view, that I could do the ministry that I do. I could tell you many stories like this. But I make so many friends, and we talk spiritually, and I talk about the gospel and straight gospel. And there's two great powers. I think I said this before. There's love and there's fear. The greatest of these is love. And God is love in person. He is love. And you will never win people by the hundreds of thousands to the Lord preaching hellfire. You can win them through preaching the love of God, that he died to pay the penalty for my sins. And I really can't see a future for the church until they get away from their agenda of being special. Yes. We are the church. Yeah. If you're not one of us, and the old thing that Adventism used to do was talk about Mrs. White saying that the people on everybody that gets to heaven will be and have kept a Sabbath day. She said, I've never read this, but she told me that Mrs. White said that they were already on this earth, wherever it is, preparing food for the feast that they were going to have as we went to heaven. Well, if you listen to what's his name, N.T. Wright, he's a bishop in the Anglican Church. He preaches, and it's biblical, that we never go to heaven. Now, that doesn't line up with Adventism. We never go to heaven. Heaven is up somewhere, but it's not where the whole thing is about. When Adam and Eve sinned, they were in the Garden of Eden. And God's whole purpose in the whole plan of salvation is to bring us back to this earth, to be the new Garden of Eden without any sin. And he believes also that you just rest like Jesus rested in the tomb for 3 days. He was whatever. He wasn't conscious. He was like we go to rest for however long before the Lord comes. And it's wonderful to listen to men like this, who is a real Bible student, and he's got it. And the Anglican Church allow him to preach these things, which are against the ordinary Christian who thinks they go straight to heaven when they die. But I can't see a transformation within the church. We tried for years and years for reform within the church, to change the church. And I just don't think that Adventism can be changed internally. And the only hope is for people to get their own personal experience with the Lord and learn for themselves, and forget about forget about Mrs. White. She's probably the biggest hindrance to Adventism from my point of view. And when it comes to, when you get leaders in the worldwide church like we've got, they're empire builders. Why does the General Conference president have to have a bodyguard at the GC?
Mm.
You know, that's not Christian.
Mm.
He was in the middle of what they profess to be, and yet they're fighting within themselves for the power struggle.
Mm.
And I think personally, and I'm only speaking personally, that we will never see, and certainly not in my lifetime.
Probably reality, probably true.
I agree with you, Bruce.
I think Bruce is right. I have to say that I do take things from my faith that have lasted the test of time, and one is the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, long suffering, kindness, gentleness. And I added to things like that compassion and honesty and genuine and being, all that type of stuff, transparency. And what I find and what I have found is that when I'm outside of the church on a building site talking to rough tradespeople, and if I open up the conversation during lunchtime about these things, I had them engaged straight away. They didn't walk away from those positive values. And the same, I've worked in the education system, the public education system now for 20 years, and that's the basis of my teaching. Those values, they have application no matter which person you talk to, whatever their agenda, whatever their faith, whether they're atheist, agnostic, Buddhist, Muslim, JW, everybody engages with those values. And I have to say that I'm thankful that I found those values and I've been able to live them.
Well, I think you're a lot like Bruce, where you don't have an agenda when you're not trying to bring people into the Adventist church. And I guess my point is that for the hard question for a progressive Adventist to answer is, sure, I found Jesus for me personally. I can bring meaning that flows from my life as I chat to other people. But as people come into the Adventist church and children grow up in the Adventist church, the question they've got to ask themselves is, are you bringing people into a system that is going to let them find the gospel and allow them to flourish?
When I was in ministry, we go to our weekly ministerial meeting once a month in Strathfield, and we were told the only thing that counts is how many baptisms you have per year and how many Bible studies you have per week. And if you're good, how much do you collect on the appeal? It didn't matter what else you did.
I know, that's right. And that's what I'm saying. I view Adventism like McDonald's. It's a fast food outlet. It's got a big brand hanging over it. And people are born into this McDonald's faith. And some of them go, you know what, I want a much healthier lifestyle. I'm going to have gardens out there. I'm going to invite people over to dinner and we're going to eat healthy food, not this McDonald's rubbish. But they still walk around with the big golden arches above their head everywhere they go. And people that they bring into the faith are going to come into the McDonald's church and they're going to have presented to them McDonald's, the diet of McDonald's. So the challenge for progressive is to go, as I preach and share this love I have of the gospel, and people say, well, where can I come to learn about this? Then you should say, well, come into McDonald's. You're setting them, sheep to wolves there. You're going to have terrible diet and terrible business practices put upon you. And then that very McDonald's church, in my analogy, they're only going to let people climb through the system that agree with the McDonald's brand. So, I'm agreeing with Bruce. That is never going to change. Adventism is never going to let go of Ellen White like the pedestal she's on. Never. And you can bring people into the church, or you can remain an Adventist. That's the big question I'm trying to talk about. If you're remaining an Adventist, but you have a progressive view, and you see Ellen White down here, not up here, you're going to have real trouble every day sharing.
I know family and friends that fit that the description that you're describing, Peter, and that they do remain, even though they are progressive, and even though they might be steamrolled when they write a letter that disagrees or suggests, maybe there's an old Earth, not a young Earth sort of stuff. They get steamrolled. they have a loyalty that keeps them.
Can I say one other thing? I'm on a bit of a roll here. That I'm not saying leave McDonald's, but please stop telling me it's going to change. Stop offering people false hope. Not you. I'm talking about these people that are progressive Adventists, and it's going to change, Pete. It's going to change one day. We believe it's going to change. And on our table that we're meeting at over there in the corner, we are all on the same page. We don't let the mainstream see that we're actually bringing in our own vegetarian burgers. To me, it's disingenuous to try and tell me that table of great vegetarian healthy food that they're offering in secret is going to permeate the McDonald's culture. It is never going to change. Stop telling me it's going to change. Sure, stay, be an Adventist, enjoy your little corner, love what you do. Let me share my life with you. I enjoy hanging out with my Adventist friends and family. But please stop thinking and telling each other it's going to change. It is not going to change.
And,
Not in a lifetime.
Not in anyone's lifetime.
Can I just add this? I agree completely that I don't believe that there is any church in this world that has all truth. I believe that all churches have a degree of truth, but they don't have it all. And to claim that they have everything, you don't get two people to agree identically on everything. How do you expect to get a whole denomination agreeing on everything? And when I think of what one of my boys said to me, and they know where Dad stands and they stand very similar, but one of my boys said to me, Dad, I could have been born in the wilds of South Africa as a heathen. I could have been born as a Muslim. I was born to Christian parents who brought me up as a Christian on Christian principles. And he said, I live my life, both in business and personal life, on Christian principles. And I was proud of him because he admits that he runs, and he's been very, very successful in his field. And he said, that's the way I run my business and my life. And if people could realize that those Christian principles are, for me personally, for you personally, not to grow an organisation, a McDonald's, if you like, but to grow people who believe in the simplicity of the gospel. And I really don't think that you can ever reform the Adventist church from within. You're hopeless, because they're going to be stuck on Ellen White. They're going to be stuck not so much on the sanctuary as they used to be. But
no, they are more stuck on it than ever now. I did an interview last week with a young person, and the sanctuary is back. It's big, it's popular, and it's the conservative sanctuary view is back and being preached to young people all around.
That's what's happening from the top down.
Yeah, from top down. Yeah.
And so how can you're fighting a losing battle?
And I think often in people I've talked to, they will often say, oh, and I'm not saying you're saying this, Bruce, because you concluded it in a really interesting way there. But a lot of people say, yeah, but all religions have their problems, and you've got to find the good within and become a good person. Yes. But if you're looking at the world as restaurants in our metaphor, there's a lot of different restaurants out there available you can go and become a member of. But some of them are definitely more McDonald's, and some of them are more, hey, this is really healthy food we're offering. And all of those restaurants are going to have problems, politics, issues, standards of their employees they've got to keep. But I'm suggesting that the real issue that progressive Adventists need to face is an acceptance that it is not going to change. And as you bring people into this wonderful gospel that you're discovering and finding, be aware that you're also bringing them into a larger McDonald's where they, like Ted Wilson's going to print a billion copies of The Great Controversy and give them away.
Yeah.
A, that if you're a greenie, Kenton, that's bad for the environment. Why not make a digital copy and give it away? And B, how many people are going to read that and not hear all the supposed Ellen White advancements and just get ploughed into the fear of young Adventists right now are rising up promoting this historic Adventism.
But they've been doing that for 180 years.
That's right. That's right. But my point is that for some reason, and God bless them, the Progressive Adventist has this endless hope it's going to change. As long as I have a nice church to go to and I feel good about it myself, it's going to change. We're going to bring about change. It's never going to change.
Yeah.
And you risk bringing people into it that are going to have huge mental health issues. If you were a Mormon, would you be as supportive of the Adventist Church, or a JW? Adventism is in the same level as those churches. And if I was a Mormon and I suddenly thought, whoa, hang on, listen to this cray-cray that's nothing to do with the Bible and all based on this prophet that's obviously a bit suspicious, I'd leave.
So would I.
No matter how great the community is. Like, I've got Mormon friends, they dance, they have good community, wonderful family focus.
Yeah.
But I would hate to risk bringing people in with my brand flashing above my head. Boy, I'm on a roll.
What was difficult as a minister is having progressive beliefs.
Yeah.
And then, like, doing Bible studies with people, which is more like, let's say, the 13 beliefs you have in the back of the baptismal certificate that make it a summary. And then I didn't actually believe those things myself.
Yeah.
You're bringing these people to a Sabbath school class where other members are in line with my beliefs and asking those sort of questions, but I'd have to jump down the throat of those members asking those open questions because I didn't want to destroy the spiritual journey of the person I was trying to gently bring into the faith.
Yeah.
So it was very tough.
Yeah.
Kenton,
incredibly tough. Sorry, Bruce.
Kenton, that's why you need to be outside of any. I would never join a church, but I'll worship anywhere with a Christian and forget what they might teach. But I can talk to them what I believe, and we can have good in-depth discussions. But
and this is where
you could never go out and try and make them Adventists.
Never proselytize to any religion.
No,
I could never do
like,
that.
if you go back to Jesus,
people say to me, well, who do you belong to? You know, I said, I don't belong to anybody but Jesus Christ and him only. I belong to him. I don't belong to any church. I'm happy to worship in different churches, but I don't belong to them. I belong to Christ.
Yeah.
And that he's my only hope.
When I would talk to Dad about these things, Dad would say,
it'd be fascinating.
Dad would say, Jesus, the words of Jesus, which were, you will know they are my followers by their love for one another.
Yeah.
There's no like having to sign up to any particular McDonald's or church. Yeah. It's just by their love and care for each other. That's the mark of a true believer.
Yeah. But imagine if someone then pushes you on it and says, so what religion are you? And you're still an Adventist, even though you've been presenting this Jesus. And you say, well, yeah, quietly, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. See the shift in their perspective of what you're talking about then. It's just a hindrance to...
Well, that's the other thing I was just trying to say there, is that Jesus didn't, apart from being born a Jew, he didn't align with any particular faith. Like
no, exactly.
He walked the desert. He hung out down in Jordan or Nazareth or Bethlehem or wherever it was, or around the temple. You know, he was free. He wasn't tied down to a denomination. He wasn't an Adventist.
What would you say then to those that are like, I mean, that's maybe a good resolution, is that all progressive Adventists take your name off the roll, but still go to church, still be a member, you know, of going to church, roaming free with the gospel and Jesus. Jesus even calls people to do that.
I'll tell you what would happen. I've got an instant here in the Adventist church, 2 people who were Seventh Day came out from Texas. They are what is it?
Seventh Day Baptist?
No, Church of Christ, Seventh
Okay.
Day. They came to the church here because they kept the Sabbath, and the Sabbath is very important to them. The church never welcomed them to this day, and they still go, and they go to the Assembly of God, and but they love the Sabbath. Now, they can't. There's people in the church. They say they can't vote. Only baptized members can vote. They can't have anything about the church, and yet they feel that that is their church, and they're barred from anything because they're not card-carrying Adventists. No matter that they love the Lord, they love the Sabbath, but they are not card-carrying Adventists, so they will not allow them to speak. And they were even at one stage, the board said they're not even allowed to talk in the Sabbath school class. Now, isn't that where they go to study scripture? And they weren't allowed to talk. And
No.
so, you know,
Adventism is a cookie cutter religion.
How could you bring people into a church saying, we hope that they're going to see the light down the track? Do you want to be a part of this hope, or do you want to just have your own hope and be certain what you believe?
Yeah, I think taking them off the roll, enjoy fellowship with all the different restaurants available, but answer Christ's call to actually be your own person, follow his truth, don't join any organised religion.
And never throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's what so many, and that's unfortunately what happened to so many of the ministers who left the church in hundreds, were kicked out. They unfortunately threw over everything. And I've never lost my faith in Jesus Christ. And I feel for those people. And the church did that to them. The church drove them from Christ.
I'll give a little plug there to Dale Ratzlaff and Colleen Tinker and all those at the former Adventist Fellowship. They have truly kept the gospel close to their hearts, and they have an incredible amount of material online. Colleen Tinker's got an incredible podcast. If you just look up, I think, just look up former Adventist Fellowship, Colleen Tinker podcast. Read any of Dale Ratzlaff's books. But like many, like you say, Bruce, many just throw everything out, but some do remain true to the core of the gospel. The interesting thing is it's not rocket science either. Like when people say, "Oh, I've got peace and love and everything," and as if they've only found it from the Adventists. No, it's not rocket science. Go and read Mark. Spend 2 hours, read the book of Mark. That's all you need to know. That's done. You don't need to sign up for anything. Anyway, I've gone from really listening and absorbing this to prattling on my own views. What's going on? What kind of interviewer am I?
We won you over.
This is where you're not judged, Peter.
I love it. You know what? I want to set up just a monthly Zoom chat with just the two of you. We'll just have a coffee. We won't go live anywhere. We'll just have a conversation. Look, I've really, really enjoyed chatting with you guys today. I really find a connection. We're representing 3 different generations, really.
Well, I've enjoyed it too. And
thank you.
I always love to talk about Jesus and that free gift. Every gift is free, but he offers a free gift to emphasize that it's there just for the accepting. Thank you, Lord, and it's yours. Nothing simpler.
And it's great to hear you at 95, nearly 96, still fired up. And Kenton, you know, I love how you've grasped this notion as well. And Kenton, you and I chatted about, I'm really keen to try and find some of your dad's audio recordings of some of his sermons. You did mention that you might have found a few.
I've recorded, I've digitized about probably about 20 of them now.
Or the actual him talking?
Yeah, preaching.
Preaching. Yeah, that's what I want. I want to, because what I'd love, if you didn't mind, if I include a couple of them in this little mini series, and we might just put together a whole lot of photos and make a little slideshow, because it's not video, is it? It's just audio.
It's just audio.
Because I think he exemplifies to me someone that, boy, hard life, difficult stuff you've been open about with marriage stuff. He was a human being, but he was able to convey a really special gospel message that I know a lot of people warmed to, resonated with. They loved hearing him talk about it. So let's try in the next week or two to get one up as part of this 70's SDA Jesus Revolution.
Yeah.
We'll put some slides, pictures with it, get a few pictures of any of the Johansens as well, some Warburton shots in there, but particularly so people can listen to it as an episode of him hearing his voice, preaching the good news of the gospel. And some of these recordings are in the 70's, aren't they? Yeah,
well, he talks about the church that Bruce has described, where, you fear for your life. You think you're going straight to hell for smoking or going to the pictures and that sort of stuff. And that's the context in which he finds the gospel and finds the salvation of Jesus. So, it's still relevant.
Yeah. And I know Ray disagrees with me and others, but I do think there's a gem of the gospel within Adventism that I would like to tease out and present, not so people become Adventists, but so I can go, here's this thing, let's plop it over here and have a look at it as a separate thing to Adventism. John Rosie has written a really interesting article, what Adventism could have been, and he nails it. So I'm going to be chatting to him about that.
Oh, awesome.
Article as well. Not to say, hey, let's keep this within Adventism. Let's say, here's another option, this gem, let's plop it over here and go, what does this look like on its own? And I think your dad's sermons can contribute to that. Hey, we'll let Ray have the last written say here. He's been watching the whole show. Well, thank you. 2.5 hours, nearly 2 hours, 45 minutes. Wow. And Ray's gone, no McDonald's for me. Give me a fish taco hut on the beach. Oh, classic. Look, thanks so much.
Ray.
Yeah,
Ray, I don't know you, but you're like-minded.
Yes. And yeah, great chatting with you guys today. Feels like we've had a good fellowship together. Any last thoughts there, Bruce? And by no means will we say this is our last chat here on SDA&A. I'd love to have you guys both back again down the track.
No, just God bless all of you.
Thank you, Bruce.
It's great to talk, and because these things are very close to our hearts, and that's what keeps me going. It's my faith that keeps me smiling, keeps me happy, keeps me vibrant.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
I walk for 2 hours every morning with a walker.
It might be that as well.
That helps.
Well, we'll catch you guys later. Thank you. Thank you again, Kenton. Great chatting. Thank you for watching, everyone. This is a different time than normal. We're normally Thursday morning at 11:30. We may actually have a interview tomorrow at 11:30 with a gentleman who really wants to promote the SDA historical sanctuary investigative judgment view. He's studied Greek. He's really got his hands on what he thinks Adventist investigative judgment sanctuary is. So I'll that may be tomorrow. If not, we might just have a day.
Ask him, Peter. Has he read the full Glacier view that Des put out to be read by the ministers, the leaders, and they didn't read it?
Exactly. I've literally just down here got the 3 original, because it was put in 3 little books.
I read every one of those.
Yes.
Up every text.
And hardly any of the Adventists that were there did.
They didn't. So get him to read that before he discusses it.
Good idea. Yeah.
Anyhow, that's
See
my
you
last
guys.
word.
Thank
Until
you.
we meet again.
Yeah.
See ya.